Happy to have on Allen Trieu, 24/7 Sports national recruiting analyst, our expert in the Midwest. And we're going to go over a lot of in-state targets for Illinois football with Allen. But Allen, June is upon us soon. We're recording this on May 19th. June has become the big month in football recruiting. So I'm sure you're prepping for a kind of crazy month ahead.
Yeah, thank you to the NCAA for putting college camps and official visits and all of that into the same month. It is a real sprint that month. It is, in a way, I guess, a little bit nice that we jam everything into spring evaluation in May, which we're dealing with right now, and then everything happens in June, and then it does allow you to really take July largely off before you get into the August camp season, like fall camp and getting into the high school season. But June is very, very busy.
Well, Alan, we're sitting here with Illinois, and they have three commitments in the class of 2024. Trey Petty, the quarterback, defensive lineman Angel McCollum out of Ohio, and Brandon Hansen, who the last time I saw him, man, he's getting huge out of Mundelein, Illinois. Obviously, things are starting to heat up, but what do you think of their start to the class of 2024?
I think it's a good start, and I think they're following the formula that they have. It's under Bret Bielema, which is starting a little bit more local than what we're used to. I say this every time I'm on with you, but it hasn't been that many years since people were asking, like, is Illinois going to recruit the Midwest at all? Are they going to recruit their home state at all? And that narrative has quickly been washed away. We don't ask those questions anymore, and now it's very much an emphasis. But I think when you look at the start of the class, to get an in-state guy to go into a very talent-laden state like Ohio and pick up a commit and then have a quarterback in the class, like, that's a good foundation. And then I think, which we're about to talk about, when you look at who that they've been able to get on campus for unofficial visits and then who they're able to get back for official visits, I think that's even arguably more important in kind of showing the momentum of the class and how well this staff is recruiting, because there's a lot of schools now angling to get these guys on campus. So for them to be able to get the kids that they're about to have up in June, I think also speaks to their recruiting efforts.
Yeah, some fans ask me, is like, should I be worried about this yet, Alan? And the one thing I tell them is, it's all about June right now. I mean, that's kind of how they've built this up, but they've set it up to where they could have a really good June. So they have to close, but they've done the work to, I mean, we're going to talk about 7 of the top 17 in-state prospects are going to take official visits, at least so far, and could add maybe one like Marquis Lightfoot down the road. Like, that seems like a better start than what Illinois has had going into previous summers.
Yeah, and like I said, we're not talking about guys who only have a few offers. We're talking about guys who could take a lot of official visits elsewhere, who are choosing to use one with Illinois. And these are some guys that also may not take all 5. They're going to take 3 or 4 or 2 in some cases, and they're using one of those visits on Illinois. So again, I think it's easy to kind of look at some of these other classes and say there's some Big Ten classes with double-digit commitments, but I think that when I look at Illinois, I'm with you. I'm not concerned about where their efforts are when you look at what's still left out there and the upside left still in this class.
Let's be honest. Let's look back a little bit, Alan. Illinois was kind of bullied on the trail for most of the previous decade by some Power 5, Big Ten programs. But what's the word on them now? A couple years into Bret Bielema and his staff being here, when you talk to prospects, parents, high school coaches, other, Power 5 coaches, like what's the word with Illinois?
Well, I think first, the staff is very personable, and I think when they prioritize kids. You hear that word a lot, like they really prioritize me. They make me feel wanted there, and you heard that a lot in the April unofficials. And I think that you realize that that's not just recruit speak, because of how many of those kids have then turned around and set officials. So those kids said, yeah, they really make me feel good here, and then they never come back. Then you know that maybe that they're just giving a nice quote in an interview, but they've put their money where their mouth is and actually set the official visits to come back, which I think that's tough to do at times. And so I think that's number one. Number two, I think that they've certainly emphasized the region that I cover more, and I just think that that's a great strategy. It makes it easier to get those guys up for unofficial visits, and I think that that's bearing fruit. And then the last thing I think is that the kids and the parents and the high school coaches have seen progress on the field. And I think that you can be as personable as you want on the trail, but I don't think it matters unless they feel like your program's heading in the right direction and you can win some games. And so when you add those elements together, I think that's where you have the official visit list for June that you have right now.
Before we dive into the in-state angle here and some of the top guys visiting next month, I want to ask you about the region, right? Because Illinois had some success under Ron Zook and Tim Beckman even in Ohio. But Lovie Smith got away from that, really relied on Florida and Texas. But now you're seeing Illinois really getting to Michigan, really getting to Wisconsin. Seen them offer kids in Iowa and Nebraska. Obviously, they continue to recruit Missouri as well. But now George McDonald tries to get in Indiana. What do you think is the potential of Illinois in some of those neighboring states?
I think the potential is there. I think more than ever, when I look around the Big Ten, the schools are kind of swimming in each other's pools a lot more. It wasn't when I started, the idea that anybody would ever try to go into Wisconsin and challenge Wisconsin on a Wisconsin kid it seemed silly to even try. Now I think kids are so much more open to leaving their home state. I think social media and huddle and all the way that they get recruited is because of that. So I see more kids leave Wisconsin than ever before. I see more kids at least leave Iowa to take visits. A couple of years ago, Nebraska came over into Iowa and got the number one player in the state, Thomas Fidone. It doesn't happen a lot previously. Then I believe it was Iowa or somebody else then came into Nebraska and took their top guy. Like, these schools are all going at each other in their backyards. I think you have to do that. And I think the kids more than ever are willing to get on a variety of campuses, get outside of their comfort zones, have a conversation with a lot of coaches because of social media and texting. So I think you have to cast a wider regional net, and I like the way that Illinois is doing that. And you're seeing some of that momentum, and they're getting in early on guys. If you talk about the state of Wisconsin and you see a couple of 25s that they've already offered, I think they were the first to offer Cooper Catalano, for instance. Like, if you can do some of that, it improves your chances of winning those battles down the road.
Well, let's focus now on in-state, because we made a big deal out of this. Illinois struggling for so long. Well, they're starting to make real big inroads. I think they signed 22 in-state prospects since Bret Bielema has arrived. Infamously, Illinois signed 0 in Lovie Smith's, second to last recruiting class. So I want to kind of break down each player. You don't have to go long here, Allen, but just give your thoughts on the prospect and just where Illinois stands. I know they're shooting for the moon here, but Marquis Lightfoot, the 4-star edge rusher out of Kenwood, has visited Illinois a couple of times, and Illinois obviously had a good defensive front. So no, it's probably a long shot, but it seems like they've made an impression at least on him.
I think you hit it right on the head. I do think that they've made an impression. They're in the game. He speaks highly of Illinois, but it is a long shot. I think he's getting close to naming, a top 5 in some official visits. Not sure yet if Illinois will be within that. He's going to look at, I think Ohio State, Michigan, Miami, USC. Those are some of the schools that I hear regularly come up with him. The staff at Kenwood really likes Illinois. He's been down there. They've recruited some of his teammates. They've also recruited some of the guys that he's played with or against, has a relationship in the past, a guy like Malik Elzy. And so, Illinois is getting into the city more, and I think that's helping them stay afloat with Marquis Lightfoot. I know that he really likes the staff, has spoken highly of them. But at the end of the day, I think that's one that's probably likely headed elsewhere.
Yeah. 4-star Naperville North DB / wide receiver Luke Williams. It feels like more schools are recruiting him as a DB. Illinois and Purdue, which could be a juicy recruiting battle with 2 staffs selling the same thing. Where do you think Illinois stands with Luke Williams?
Yeah, I think those are the 2 right now. I mean, those are the 2 that he has the official visit set with, so it's easy to come to that conclusion. But they're neck and neck. I think that both staffs have done a really, really good job there. You mentioned there's some cross-pollination with some former Illinois staff members recruiting him. And so that one's going to be very interesting. I think that he's one where I mentioned before, like, get on campus, feel like the staff is prioritizing him. He does know that it's leaning more DB, but the door is open for him to do some other things. I agree with you. I think it's just harder to find defensive backs with his size and athleticism than it is to find receivers with the same types of measurables. So I think that's why schools are leaning more towards defensive back with him. I don't have a clear leader there between those 2. I don't know that he does either. And I think the official visits are going to help him hopefully reach that point, because after the unofficial visits and after the contact that he's had with both schools, I think that is a very, very close recruitment right now between those two programs.
Yeah, they're selling the same thing, which makes this fascinating. I know he's close to David Alano, of course, high school teammate, Jared Beatty, some other guys at Illinois, so maybe that can help Illinois. Another kid who's committed to another Big Ten program and now is out there and going to take an official visit to Illinois at the end of the month is Austin Alexander, cornerback, kind of between the 3-star and 4-star ranking there, Allen. Marion Central on the south side of Chicago. So what do you think about where Illinois stands with him, given that he really blew up? Michigan, USC came in and offered.
Yeah, he's a really, really good player. I went down there to see him play, and he got hurt before I saw a solitary play, and then kind of didn't play towards the end of the season, and that's affected his being able to go out and camp some places. I think had that not happened, we might be talking about a 4-star prospect here instead of an 89 that's right on the borderline. So we'll see what happens as a senior. I think he's got a shot together. He kind of actually reminds me of, I remember when we first started talking about Nate Hobbs, and we kind of went like, why something's not lining up here with what we see on tape and his
level. You're the high man on him.
Yeah.
We were both pretty high on him coming in. Looked pretty good now.
Yeah, absolutely. But so Austin at first was the same deal where it was like, I think he had Wisconsin and Toledo, and he committed to Wisconsin. Now his recruitment, I think, has caught up to what the talent level is. And I think Illinois has done a good job of just staying in that one and chipping away and kind of weathering the early storm after his decommitment of, like you said, USC offered, Michigan offered, Iowa came in and offered. There's been some others. And I think Illinois has stayed there through that recruitment. I don't know how much a program like USC has continued to kind of stay in the forefront of that recruitment. And so I think as that's happened, Illinois has risen up the list and has been able to secure this official visit. So I think that they have a very real shot with him.
Yeah, especially when you can sell a top 5 pick at that position. It certainly doesn't hurt. He's going to visit Kansas as well next month that you've reported. A big one, Allen, and Illinois got a good running back sell, but Mount Carmel running back Darian Dupree also going to take visits to Wisconsin and Michigan. Also pretty good running back sells. What do you think of that recruitment right now?
Yeah, so he's, got the Wisconsin crystal ball. I can see that. They've done a good job recruiting him. They're a program that has run the football. It's a new staff, so he's getting to know them. But they did recruit him at Cincinnati. So I think it's more Wisconsin, Illinois right now. I know he likes Michigan. He's going to take an official there. They have a commitment from a top 247 running back in Jordan Marshall out of Ohio. So not certain that he'll favor being the second back in the class over going to a place where he could potentially be the feature back. And I think that certainly exists at Illinois, but he's another one where when you talk to him about Illinois, the first thing that comes up is the staff and the way that they've recruited him and the way that they've prioritized him. And I can tell that that's important to him. I think he's picked that up at Illinois. That's why he's coming back for an official visit. So I don't have a crystal ball pick in. I don't think that Evans' Wisconsin pick is a bad one. I think the Badgers are very high in this recruitment. So Illinois is going to have to work to unseat them, but I definitely think that they have more than a puncher's chance to do that.
And this is what you want if you're Illinois, right? Battling Wisconsin for a running back. Realistically, that's a really good spot to be. One guy I felt like they've been in a good spot for a while. His coach, former Illini, and that's Tyshawn Griffin out of Morgan Park. His coach, Chris James, a former Illini. He's going to take an official here in June. What do you make of that one?
Yeah, same thing. I think Illinois is one of the top schools there. And here's some probably common schools when you talk about who else is a threat there. I think Purdue is one. I know he's mentioned Kansas State in the past. That's a little bit of a new one, but their staff does a good job and they come into the area and the region and do a nice job. But I think Illinois is right there with any of them. I think they have a really, really good chance there. I think he's another guy that when you're able to get these kids up for unofficial visits, I think it just helps. It helps set the scene. He did that, I believe, in April and was able to get up there and really started to build a good relationship with the staff. Now they've offered really early too. So they got an offer before this staff was even in place potentially. It was really, really early. And so he's been up a lot, very familiar. And I think that's going to help them in this recruitment. That's one that, as I looked at the list of who you sent me, he would be high on the probability list of guys I think Illinois could get out of this group of official visitors.
I would agree. One guy I kind of have always had circled as this could be like a litmus test recruit, because all these guys are really important. But Eddie Turk, even though his father went to Illinois, his sister goes to Illinois, is the type of lineman, suburban lineman, Illinois had struggled to land, especially when Northwestern has been involved, Wisconsin has been involved. And he's going to take visits to Illinois and Northwestern. Just said he's going to take a visit to Miami as well. On Alliance Township, I really like him as a prospect. What do you think of him, and what do you think of his recruitment?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about him is that as time's gone on and he's gotten bigger, I think he can be looked at as a possible two-way guy. I mean, I think he could go on either side of the ball. I think he's good at both of them. When you have a kid, that big and physical and, early to the radar guy who played varsity early, got recruited early, offered early, and now has kind of developed into his body. And it's just hard to find those body types on both sides of the ball with that ability. So it'll be interesting to see what schools decide to do with them. But I think you just take as much size and talent as you can, and then you figure it out. And as far as his recruitment, I think it's similar to Austin Alexander, where Illinois has just stayed in there, stayed consistent. There's been other schools who have faded in and out, and I think that they've remained very consistent with him. Another one that sounds like a broken record, but when you get these guys up unofficially in the spring, it really helps your chances. And you could tell that Illinois' chances ramped up once he was able to get up there a little bit more and start to build the rapport, and also see that, hey, these guys are serious about me. They want me. And so you mentioned this being a litmus test recruitment. He is going to visit those other schools. I think they're formidable opponents, but I think Illinois is right there in this one. That's another one that I could see them coming out on top on.
Yeah, I've wanted to hit all these names, but it does feel like almost a broken record at this point, because 3-star Wheaton North Edge, Joe Barna, you caught up with him. I caught up with him after Illinois offered. It's like an Illinois-Wisconsin battle. Like, this is becoming a pretty, I guess, consistent story, Allen, where it's like they are battling what has been the Big Ten West best program along with Iowa.
Yeah, it's interesting too. When we watched this film for the first time in Evaluate, this is before Illinois offered him. So the first name that popped in my head was Pat Farrell. I thought this kind of reminds me of Pat Farrell's junior film, and so I think that Illinois has a type there a little bit, and I think he fits into what they do, and so I think that's going to help. Another one that got on campus, they offered him on an unofficial visit. They've been recruiting him really well. I think the defensive staff does a really good job on these defensive linemen. That's where you see a lot of high-end defensive linemen. We're talking about Lightfoot and Turk and those guys, like keeping Illinois in the forefront of their recruitment. It's the same here. Now, what I don't have a great feel for yet is Wisconsin and this new staff. And I think I'm still figuring out, some of their relationships and how they'll do in a state like Illinois. I know they're going to recruit Ohio extremely well, have a lot of ties there. I do think they're really, really good recruiters, and that's how they were able to be as successful as they were at Cincinnati. And so now you're going to see that, translate up into Madison. So this is going to be we have a couple of interesting first battles between Luke Fickell and Bret Bielema. This is one of them. I do think that, in talking to him yesterday, he said, he's not going to go to any camps. So he's not looking to go, try to earn an offer from Notre Dame, Ohio State, or another regional program like that. So I think seems pretty happy with the options he has right now. And it seems like the two that have risen to the forefront are Illinois and Wisconsin. And I think the official visits will make the difference.
One of the most intriguing guys in the last in-state guy I'll bring up here is Pinckneyville tight end, Carson Conklin. I mean, Pinckneyville, very small town in downstate Illinois, but you turn on that film, Allen, you go, wow, those are traits. Those are tools. What do you think of Carson Conklin as a prospect? And obviously he's blown up Michigan State. A bunch of other Power 5 programs have offered too.
Yeah, it's a pretty solid tight end year in the Midwest, but I think after the first couple, then you see a guy like Eric Carner just blow way up.
Yeah. As
schools got down into this, okay, who are the next guys? I mean, it's like pretty clear, the 6'6" with the tools that he has, this has got to be one of the next guys up. And so we've all had to kind of quickly figure out exactly where Pinckneyville is. Not really on the beaten path. So I think that he's got huge upside. And I think just as we've had to us and the schools have quickly tried to figure out, like, okay, where does this guy belong? What kind of prospect is he? Where should he be ranked? I think he's in the same process of drinking from the fire hose a little bit, of all of a sudden, it was like, wow, I got Virginia Tech. It's a Power 5 offer. And then he blinked, and there were several Big Ten schools. And so when I talked to him, it's he's still figuring it out. And so I think of all the guys on the list, he might have the least familiarity with the schools that are recruiting him right now. And so I think the official visits for him, especially, they're important for all the guys we mentioned. I think for him, it's going to be really important, because it's going to be a chance for him to truly dig in and get a feel for these programs. He wasn't a guy that I think all the guys that we mentioned before had at least gone to some games or something at these schools in the past before their spring visits. I know that Carson had gotten up to like many unofficial game visits in the fall. And so this is going to be June is going to be very important. So I don't feel like there's huge leans anywhere in that recruitment. I think he's going in as an open slate and going to figure it out.
I would agree with you. He's an aw shucks kid, and I think he's kind of just taking in this moment. Like, this is all pretty big for him. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with June. But I want to ask you quickly about some of the new Big Ten coaches and how they've kind of impacted the trail here. But before I do that, I just want to ask you, like, what's a fair expectation for Illinois football recruiting, whether it's rankings, whether it's, prospects? Like, what do you think is a fair expectation for Illinois in the class of 2024?
Yeah. So I understand why people look at the rankings so much, and we do them, and we do our best at them, and we find them to be important. And I think over the years, the importance or lack of importance there has been exaggerated. I do think they're more important than generally given credit for. And the NFL draft numbers back that up. That said, I think you have to look at trajectory, and you have to see where the class finishes relative to expectations and where the program's at. Just to give an example, Michigan comes off of a college football playoff appearance a year ago, and they have a class that's in the top 20, which most programs would love, but it's not where they expected because of their playoff appearance. And so most people consider that class a disappointment, where then you have like a new staff at Nebraska who comes in and signs the top class in the Big Ten West. And it's much lower than Michigan's class, but based on the expectations, you view that number differently. And I think it's the same thing with Illinois. I think you have to look at the individual battles. Like, I think last year's class, regardless of where it finishes, you land Malik Elzy, that's a huge notch for the program. You land Caden Fagan, that's a huge land for the program. And a guy with that kind of upside, you go and late, you can get in on a guy like Colin Dixon and bring him in. So I think you have to look at some of those individual wins more so than the class rank. So I think Illinois, I think you want to see a little improvement every year. They were 55th overall last year. They were 42nd with the composite just in recruiting, or high school recruiting. And I think they can do a little better than that this year, especially if they can get a couple of the guys we just talked about. So I think you want to see a little bit of improvement. We would like to see them in the 30s. I think that's a reasonable expectation. I think they can do it. And I think that would be a really, really good sign of progress. But, as I think we're going to talk about, the competition's heating up in this conference.
Yeah, the Big Ten keeps loading up with coaches. I mean, to add Luke Fickell, to add Matt Rule, and I couldn't say better things about Ryan Walters and my interactions with him and covering him. So what has been the impact of those new coaches on Big Ten recruiting?
It's just made everybody have to up their game, I think. And that was already there. It's funny, there was an influx at once of the previous group in the Big Ten. I think, PJ Fleck and Jeff Brom and Scott Frost, like all those guys came in kind of at the same time. And it was like everybody up their game. I think I noticed at that time, the schools who had sort of kept to one formula for a long time, like Wisconsin and Iowa, had to rethink what they were doing recruiting wise. I think Northwestern did a little bit too. I think at the same time, Matt Campbell came in at Iowa State. And even though that's not a Big Ten school, they pushed schools to reassess what they do in recruiting. I think that's happening now also with these new personalities, the more aggressive recruiting styles that they're going to bring. They're doing things differently though. Luke Fickell is going a bit more regional. They put out I think that they are very active, it seems, on social media. They're getting kids on campus. Nebraska's going a lot more national. They're looking for traitsy type guys. You're not seeing them battle in on the Carson Conklins and the Austin Alexanders and the Darian Duprees as much. They're going to different places. So they're not going to run into these other programs as much. And then Ryan Walters is actually, I think, they've taken this underground approach. I think they closed off spring practice, and that's something that I feel like their recruiting efforts have been too, of like, we're going to kind of do what we do under the radar. We don't want anybody to kind of notice that we're doing well over here. I thought they had maybe the sleeper class of the conference in 2023. They kind of sneakily had a really good class. They've kind of sneakily started pretty strongly here. I think they have 8 or 9 commits in the 2024 class. And so even though you don't hear much maybe about them, it seems like that's by design with Purdue. So it's not quite the same as when PJ and Scott Frost and Jeff Brown all kind of came in and kicked the door down at the same time, because these new coaches have different styles. But I do think that it's producing some interesting recruiting battles when you see how often Illinois and Purdue and Wisconsin at least are running into each other.
Yeah, it's fascinating. But Illinois competing with those programs, it's what you want to see. And they've won some against Iowa. Obviously lost some against Wisconsin last year. It'll be interesting to see how they do against those schools coming up this year. Allen Trieu gave us more than about a half hour of your time. We really appreciate it, man. And get some sleep in June, man.
I'm going to get sleep before June so that I'm ready to go for June, and then I'll sleep again in July. But never a problem. Thanks for having me.